Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to have you here with us in London. Maybe you could begin with a brief introduction to Sugarcane. For people who don't know anything about the documentary, what can they expect?
Sure. So Sugarcane follows an investigation into abuse and missing children who were sent to St. Joseph's Mission, which is an Indian residential school near Williams Lake, British Columbia, Canada. It's also the school that my family was taken away to.
Maybe you can tell us a bit about how the project came about. Obviously, it's an incredibly personal story to you, but perhaps how you came on board working together and why now was the right time to sort of go into this investigation and make this documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an investigative journalist and filmmaker who's been following stories of human rights abuses and conflict and people caught in the crossfires in places like Afghanistan and the Saharan Desert. But I had never turned my lens on my own country. I was born and raised in Canada, and the horrors that it perpetrated against the First Peoples of that land. And so when the news of potential unmarked graves were discovered on the grounds of a former Indian residential school in British Columbia, I felt gut pulled to the story. And the first thing I did was text Julian. Jules and I worked our first reporting jobs together almost a decade ago. We were randomly sat at the desks next to each other and became fast friends. And over the years, wanted to work on something together and hadn't found something. And in the time since working together, Julian went on to become an incredible writer and storyteller and historian of Indigenous life in North America. And so this felt like the perfect project to bring kind of my visual story skill set and focus on conflict and investigative journalism and Julian's incredible insights into Indigenous life and as a nonfiction storyteller, as a writer. And so I texted him. He said, I'll think about it and get back to you. And in the meantime, I went looking for a nation that said they were going to do a search. And I found an article in the Williams Lake Tribune about Chief Willie Sellers in the Williams Lake First Nation. And I reached out to Chief Sellers, and he called me back that same afternoon. And he said, the creator has always had great timing. Just yesterday, our council said we need someone to document this search. So I spoke to council that week. I got my gear together. I booked flights. And 2 weeks later, I was ready to go. And that's when I heard back from Julian.
And when I called Em back and told her, hey, about that documentary, I'd be open to doing it. That's when she said, great, I've identified a First Nation that's leading a search, and that search is happening at St. Joseph's Mission near Williams Lake. And as you might imagine, I just about fell out of my chair. And then I said, wow, that's really crazy. Did you know that's the school that my family was taken away to and where my father was born? So out of 139 Indian residential schools in Canada, Em had chosen the one school that my family was taken away to and where my father's life began, without even realizing it.
And that was sort of leads perfect to my next question, which is obviously when you're making a documentary or sometimes the form which they take, the filmmakers at some distance is quite detached, looking at their subject in a more objective way. Obviously, you're part of the storytelling and you're there in front of the camera and your own story and your own experiences are unfolding. Was that something that you did set out to have from the beginning? Was that something you had any trepidation about, or is that something that just happened organically?
It happened really organically. I was originally just supposed to be a collaborator with Em behind the camera. But she then happened to choose the school that my family was sent to, and I ended up getting pulled into the story because ultimately I felt that one of the most important parts of this story, as with any story, is not just the investigative truth or the intellectual truth, it's also the emotional truth. And it's really important for people to understand what the intergenerational impacts and emotional stakes are of these schools for survivors and their descendants. And I think that a big part of what we were trying to get at through my story and through others was that piece of it. I think that's part of what's special about film. Film is a full sensory experience. It lets you into the lives of the people who you're following. And I think it would be a mistake to tell a story with such deeply personal, intimate, often quite visceral stakes without, letting people into what that has meant for the people who are living that reality.
This is, also a history in documentary filmmaking of portraying Indigenous people in a very colonial lens and really from an arm's length distance. And, in the first kind of thought of documentary Nanook of the North, there's a very, kind of othering and some might say kind of racist and diminutive portrayal of this community and not true to what their life actually was. And it was so important to us that this be rejection of that premise and to instead tell a film and tell a story from inside the community, under the skin of thing, from the perspective of the folks that are living it, and to tell an epic story because this is a community and a people worthy of epic storytelling. Their lives are cinematic and profound, and they are courageous and funny and interesting and multidimensional. And so it was so important to us that we transcend those tropes and kind of vestiges of old and archaic forms of storytelling.
Yeah, and I think it sort of comes through even in sort of the narrative form of it. You know, we're not sort of getting a cut and dry explanation or narration of exactly what happened, but it's coming out in vignettes through all these different subjects and different interactions they're having. And for me, I think what's quite powerful about that is it brings the past into the present, because you're not just looking back and saying, okay, what happened, you know, all those years ago, but it's continually looking at how it's still impacting the current generation. And so was that also an important part of the way the documentary came together?
Absolutely. You know, one of the core pieces of this film is to show people, you know, this is obviously a film about a historical subject, but it's a verite documentary that's set in the present, that follows people's lives in the present as this investigation at St. Joseph's Mission unfolds. And the intent behind that is very specifically to show people that the death toll, the suffering from St. Joseph's Mission is ongoing. This is not something that is, you know, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in the past. This is right now. This is life or death right now for Indigenous peoples. And, you know, I think people don't really understand that. And I think that that's a conversation that the whole of society needs to have, but also one that our own communities need to have as well, because there are so many parts of this history that we ourselves still do not talk about, and that this film is trying to help drive a conversation towards.
And in that sense, well, it's not afraid to capture the silences, because often when you're speaking to people from a community, it's still not something that people are able or willing or maybe even have the language to be able to talk about. But rather than sort of editing that out, that's left in, because almost the silence can be as powerful as what someone might be able to reveal.
Certainly the truth for my family is that we did not talk about the residential schools. And I think that that was something that was really important for us to portray in this film, was the silence that endures within the very people who lived through these atrocities.
Thinking about the impact of a film like this, it does feel like it's more saying that this is an investigation that's only just begun. This is a reckoning that's only just been started, you know, and unraveling all that trauma still needs to happen. Like when they go and speak to the Pope and there's an apology, but, you know, well, what's next? So is that what you hope will sort of happen after this?
You know, I think particularly in Canada, there's this kind of urgency to move towards an idea of reconciliation, but we insist with the film that we're not at the truth yet. The film uncovers for the first time evidence of a pattern of infanticide at St. Joseph's Mission, of babies, some born to priests and some unwed mothers who were either adopted into white families or cast into the school's incinerator. And we know that this is not a story that only exists at St. Joseph's Mission, but this is the first time that evidence of that is coming forward. And so we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And of course, in the United States, where there were 3 times as many schools, an inquiry into the boarding school system there has only just begun as well. And the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, the first Indigenous Cabinet Secretary, is leading this. She was at our premiere of our film, and so the film is part of that conversation. The film is going to be shown in the U.S. Senate next week, and there is a bill heading to the Senate floor to start a truth commission in the United States. And so there could not be a more urgent moment for this film to be seen and known. And of course, here in the UK, The Crown was a part of creating the system and enforcing it in Canada in particular. And so we hope that the film catalyzes those conversations as well as pushes the church in particular to open their records so that at the very least, survivors and their descendants can know what happened.
More positive sense, is there also something very powerful about people just being able to watch this film, watch your journey unfold? I was reading, even in some of the screenings, people responding quite viscerally and finding it quite cathartic, actually. So do you think even just, the power of cinema and the power of a doc film like this can be helping people heal just by watching the film?
It's been incredibly encouraging to bring this film all around the world and to have so many people identify with it in various ways. I think that it's obvious the ways that Indigenous peoples ourselves would identify with this story. I think that people from our background see themselves, their parents, their grandparents in this story, but also things like family trauma, reconciliation within ourselves, within our communities. Those are things that you don't have to be Indigenous to understand or identify with. There's a road trip in this film, there's a rodeo, there's a powwow, there's fishing, there's all sorts of experiences that non-Native people might have also shared in themselves. And I think that, those pieces of the story, which are the pieces of the story that point to the ways that people endure, that they remain together, that they remain families, that they remain communities, are actually core to the story and how, we've gotten through this history of genocide as a people. I think it's been incredibly encouraging to see people identify with and be moved by this film and to see that part as an essential part of this narrative as well.
And when you watch it back now, is there a moment that you find almost most difficult to watch? Maybe some of the scenes with your father, or on the flip side, one that you really like watching, like you say, celebration of that community, celebration of culture?
It's hard to watch yourself. It's been really moving to see, people identify with my cat and my dad in particular. I have always had this sense that my cat is this incredible, grandmother who I think lots of people with a grandmother can identify with, who, has these parts of her knowledge of the way things were that for us are really important, because the way things were was our entire way of life, was the language that we spoke and that we're losing. To see the way that she carries that and carries it with a deep love and wittiness in addition to the pain. I always laugh when she makes her little witty remarks in her few scenes in the film. I think also, my dad is this complicated but, epic and ultimately lovable sort of trickster figure who makes incredible art and comes into the film smoking a joint and, makes all kinds of hilarious jokes and has his own, pain and story that he's carrying, and that also intersects with my own pain and my own story. And to have people see that complexity and ultimately, have love for all of these people, as full humans, as complicated humans who are dealing with their own stuff that is the result of our own history of colonization, has just been so encouraging for me to know that audiences and people can see each other in that way.
I think for me, watching the late Chief Rick Gilbert, he is a character who is struggling not only with his faith, he's a survivor of the school, but also with his own DNA and the secrets that he uncovers within that. And he goes as far as the Vatican to confront, the Catholic order that abused him and bear witness to the Pope's apology. We were very close with him, and he passed away during the edit, and was just an incredible man with so much integrity and courage. And he's also really funny. And he has some of the best line in the film, one about pajama socks, one about Mussolini. You'll have to watch the film to find out. But those are the moments that bring me joy, and also just that his legacy lives on through the film, even though he's not here to, carry out the message. His voice is very much present. And I think, I never get tired of watching him in that kind of penultimate scene confront the head of the Catholic order that abused him, it moves me every time. And I had the privilege of holding the camera in front of him while he made that choice and went there in that moment to speak his truth. And it was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And we miss him a lot. So.
You know, in terms of the response to the film, you know, all these different awards, you know, including from Sundance, which must feel amazing, and to have that recognition. Have you also received pushback? Because I know going against things like the Catholic Church aren't easy. Going against institutions isn't easy. And as we know, like you say, even here in the UK, it takes a lot to get people to look at their past and to be able to confront it.
Yeah, you know, I think that it's very challenging, even sometimes within our own communities, to confront the realities of what the Catholic Church was involved in. And I think that the film tries to deal with that in a very fair and even-handed way. You know, there are people in this film who you watch who themselves were abused by the Catholic Church, who remain faithful to that religion, if not the institution. Usually there's more complicated feelings about the institution. And, you know, I think that we try to do justice by that. You know, I myself, for example, go to Mass with my Ke'a on Christmas. I know a lot of the, you know, the Catholic hymns in our own language. You know, there has been some pushback, but most of that pushback is from the branch of pushback that might be described as more akin to like sort of Holocaust denial. So, you know, not really the kind of stuff that is worth engaging with.
We haven't had an official response from the Catholic Church yet, though we're very interested to see how they do respond. And I think, you know, there is a denialist movement in Canada, as Julian was pointing to, that refutes kind of the premise that these schools were a bad thing. And I think all you have to do is watch the film to understand what the kind of impact it had, and also knowing that, you know, the robust journalism and work that we put in to verify everything that's in the film. And so there might be more denialism to come, but we stand by what we made and the truth and of the folks who lived it.
What's going to be next for you both in terms of filmmaking? Doing another project together, doing things separately?
I'd rather talk about what Julian's doing because he has a lot more going on than me. Julian's writing an incredible book, and he has been writing that book during the entire making of this film, which is nuts, whereas this is all I've been doing. And so he has that coming up, and I'll let him speak to that. And as for me, I'll continue, telling stories of people going through moments of reckoning and conflict and trying to make their way through it around the world. And that will be the next feature documentary. Tune back in a couple to 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I have a book coming out next year with it's gonna be with Profile Books here in the United Kingdom and Commonwealth. Actually just met with my publisher today, which is very cool here, my UK publisher. It's called We Survived the Night. It'll be published by Knopf in North America. It will also be translated into French and German. It's a different story than this one, but it's also kind of personal. It has an element of memoir, some elements of family history, some reporting, and then also it's all told in the style and structure of a Coyote story, which is a trickster narrative from my own people. I'm really excited about it and need to finish editing it right now, actually.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Really enjoyed presenting the film here in London.
Thank you.
Best of luck with your future projects. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, really
Thank you.
appreciate it.